Thank you so much for joining me today on the How to Buy a Used Violin video. This is a two-part series because there's so much to cover. It's a lot of education, and sometimes it's so overwhelming to know where to begin when you're purchasing an instrument and in that inquiry process that it's going to be really helpful for you just to have some general guidelines. So I'm going to offer 9 guidelines. And then there's a second video which gives you a 14-point checklist to know exactly what questions to ask the seller and how to really carefully inspect the craftsmanship to make sure you're getting the best violin possible. Before we dive into the content though, I want to make sure that you know on my website, you can download the entire article, so you can have this. Perhaps there's another person in your household that needs a little tutorial on this. And also there's a checklist, so you can print these out and then you're going to have these for your purchasing process. You'll see me from time to time look down at my notes because I don't want to miss anything. So the first thing is, why used? We often think newer is better, and the one place where this is contrary is in violins. A good violin is built to last, will stand the test of time. This instrument here was built in 1780 and sounds fantastic. Another reason why people choose used violins is because once you play on it for a while and you're bowing, that sends vibrations into the wood and it opens up the wood to create an even fuller sound. Now, if a violin has not been played, you don't know how that's going to open up. So it's just more of a known variable. Another reason, I was just thinking about this last minute as I was making this, I purchased an instrument about 8 years ago. It was a new violin, and the maker did not let the wood cure fully, so it came unglued. It came apart at some of the seams. And again, it's just one of the gambles that you have with a newer instrument. So I'm not saying don't buy a new violin, but as you go onto this journey, you need to know that most of us as professional musicians are buying used instruments because it's the preferred option. Our second thing is you need to set your price range. Now this can be daunting, and I will be upfront. You can spend anywhere from $89 on eBay to the cost of more than your house, easily. There is a huge range, and some of you are going to live in specific areas that are going to have a price range that is in context of where you live. So what I'm recommending is that you do a little bit of research. Now, my guess is that if you're watching me here, you're probably looking for some more student models. That's my guess. So I might go to some of the reputable string catalogs like Shar Catalog, Johnson String Catalog, and that gives you just a price point. Okay, here's just one number I can put in my head and I can say, okay, is this something I need to work towards, or do I have more resources than this? And it just gives you a frame of reference. Now, the other reason why I brought this up, oftentimes very informal sellers, and I'm referring to Craigslist sellers, that's if you're in America, we have an online selling website that's in every city where people will go to sell things. Oftentimes that type of a seller is going to overestimate the value of their instrument. So that's a place to just beware. So after we've set your price range, the next thing to do is to size this appropriately. Now, this is a little more specific to young children, but even if you're getting a full-size violin, there's going to be something applicable for you. Young children, need an instrument that is sized by an experienced violin teacher. I've lost count of the times that I've sent a student to the violin shop and had them sized by the luthier only to be incorrectly sized. And it's just heartbreaking for a child. And as the parent, if you're a parent watching this, you don't have any extra time or money to just be loose with. So you need to get that sized appropriately to begin with. Don't rely on something you found from the internet or something you read online, an actual teacher, because you need to look at the arm length. Also, we might look at the finger length. Next, you need to know that violins are very much like clothing in that there can be a range. So if we have a 3/4 violin that's this big for this maker, it might be a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller from another maker. Now the same thing goes for weights. Violins have different weights. I personally find a heavier violin to be very difficult to play. So that's something I'm going to be taking into consideration. It's not just going to be a full-size violin that I'm looking for, but I'm looking for a certain weight in correlation with that length. The last thing, I'd mentioned that violins are like clothing and that there's a slight variation in sizing. Do not buy up a size and think your child will just grow into it. What's going to happen? I'm going to illustrate. To play properly and correctly, you need to have the shoulder in the back and bottom of the socket. When you put an instrument that's too big in for the child, they're going to have to bring that forward, stretch those muscles so they've cut off all of the power of their back muscles. Now they're using these smaller muscles, which are going to work too hard for too little of a result. They're going to have to do incorrect things with their hand here, and we're building mind-body connections. These are extremely difficult to unravel at a later point. So in defense of children and proper sizes, please proceed properly with that and getting your child the right size of instrument. Now the next thing I'm going to say is part 4, and this is going to sound a little bit contradictory, and that is that cracks are normal. So let me explain, that needs some explaining. So I said my instrument was built in about 1780. We don't have an exact date for that, but it's cracked several times, and I'm going to see if I can hold it up to the string here. It's very easy for violins to crack in this vicinity because there's not very much integrity, and they crack and they go up to what is called the purfling. Now, if you don't know what purfling is, I'm going to give a brief explanation, but it's pretty neat, and it's something I would suggest just look it up after this. So purfling is an inlay of a harder wood, and it's put in there so that when the cracks come, they stop at the edge and they don't go all the way up here and compromise the integrity of the construction. Quality instruments have inlaid purfling. Lesser quality instruments, more inexpensive instruments, have painted on purfling. It's solely decorative, does not protect. And here's a little thing that you need to know. Purfling that's done really well looks like it's painted on. So that's a question to ask. That's a question to ask. Now, I said there's 2 things that I would be really cautious with if I was noticing some cracks. And the first one is, again, if it goes beyond the purfling and all the way to the edge, that's a very complicated repair. Secondly, if that crack has been left unrepaired for a length of time, the wood is going to warp out of place. So now you have 2 problems. You have the crack and warped wood, which is very difficult to get back in the original position and glue. I personally, unless the instrument was so spectacular and I had one of the best violin makers in the world live in my city, and I say that with a little irony because I live in Eugene, Oregon, and we have the #1 modern maker in our city here. But that's a little off topic. So unless I had those resources, I would avoid that instrument. Number 5 is to investigate the craftsmanship. So this is a continuation of what we were just discussing. Now, this is such a big topic that it is its own video and its own checklist. There's going to be 14 things to look for. But the overall point that I want to make here in this video is that cracks are normal. Some of these things are normal, but they need to be budgeted for. So if you're saying my budget is $2,000 firm and you find a violin for $1,900 and it needs $500 worth of work and a new case and a new bow, then you're completely out of bounds for some of your goals. So know in advance that those things make a difference with your overall budget, and join me on my other video and we can go through what that checklist is. So number 6 is to beware of the Stradivarius label. This is, I've been doing this for decades and have heard this quite a number of times. People say, wow, my grandma has a violin in the closet and the label on the inside says Stradivarius. Probably is not. We want to feel lucky, but it's probably not. Those are priceless works of art. They're usually kept in museums. They're played by select concert artists, and in order to play it, you can't even put the shoulder pad on by yourself. You have to have a special handler come and do all of those things with the Stradivarius. Now, that being said, I want to tell you about two stories that happened to me in my career where some families that I was working with just got very lucky. One was a family that went to an auction, and it was a bundle. It was a bunch of bows and I think 2 full-size violins. And they just bought it all. It was a very modest sum, and they took it to the store to get appraised. And boy, about 20 times what they paid. So that was a best case scenario. I had another student a little more recently that went to a pawn shop, and they found this beautiful German violin. It took them many, many trips to find it. They bought this. This is when their daughter was very young, but they knew that their daughter was going to need a full-size violin. So they started the process years in advance, and that time and persistence really paid off. So these things happen, but you just need to do your research, and that's where the ball is in your court. The 7th thing of our 9 guidelines here is to hear the violin played. So this should really excite you. This is the part where I really love the tonal quality. So the way that sound works, if I'm playing the violin here, I can hear it underneath my ear, but the acoustics need about 2 meters or about 6 feet to fully develop. So you want another person to play that for you so you can stand back that distance and evaluate it. And chances are it's going to either make you fall in love and know that, yes, this is the violin for me, or you'll have that hesitation and then you can continue on your journey and looking at some other instruments. So it's a great way for you to make some of those finalizing decisions when you're not quite sure, you're on the fence. Maybe this is it, maybe not. Another thing, if you are a student watching this, you might not yet have developed all of your technique and all of your experience to really get a deep tone and to be able to produce what you're studying. So you're going to need to have somebody else play that for you. Oftentimes you can go and either have your teacher come, and a common courtesy is just to ask your teacher to use one of your lessons as the time at the violin store, or you can bring violins to your lesson and have your teacher play them for you there. Couple more points here. Now, number 8 is that prices are negotiable. If you're watching this in America and you're anything like I am, this is not something that we're used to doing and not something we are comfortable with doing. But I'm making this video because I want you to have the best possible outcome when you're purchasing an instrument. If you're buying from a private seller, someone who had an instrument just sitting in their attic, sitting in their basement, chances are they want to get rid of it. So make them a deal. If you're buying it at a violin shop, again, it never hurts to ask. If they won't bring the price down, ask these following questions. Will it include a shoulder pad, some rosin, a new case, a bow rehair in the next year, adjustments as I need them? So get creative with how you can make the most of your purchasing budget in this process. The last thing I wanted to say on this guidelines is that violins maintain their value. What do I mean by that? I bought this violin at a store in Chicago, about 20 years ago, and I will always be able to take it back to that store and get what I paid for it if I choose to upgrade or switch into another instrument. That's significant to know because I've worked with some people before that, until they knew that, didn't want to invest as much as they ended up doing. Particularly when you're getting the full size, which is the largest size instrument and the one that we're really thinking that we're going to be playing on for the rest of our lives. If we can think about that, this may be an heirloom, or just know that it's not going to drop in price. To illustrate, I've even known some people on the higher end, I'm talking the very, very higher end, 200,000 plus, that even have used instruments as financial investments as a way to keep their money secure. That concludes 9 guidelines for how to buy or use violin, and I would love to hear from you. Let me know, did I answer your questions? Do you feel more confused? Is there something I didn't cover? Because if I'm not serving you, then I'm not satisfied. I want to make sure that I'm really giving you high quality content to move you forward in your music making. Please let me know in the comments below, and if you join me on my website, you can download this PDF of a checklist and the entire article. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you on part 2.